director at Rainforest Action Network, and the co-host of the Green and Red podcast, which I really highly recommend checking out. I'll send a link in the chat. And he's going to talk a little bit about the history of May Day. Thank you so much for being here, Scott.
Yeah, I'm
Really appreciate it.
excited to be here. I brought a slideshow.
Great. I
So,
can make you
where is it?
co-host.
Too many tabs, sorry. I'm going to talk a little bit
All
about
good.
May Day today. Um, so May Day. Um, May Day is a holiday which has its roots in pagan traditions. Um, Comes out of Europe, goes way back, many hundreds of years. Affiliated with things like the maypole. But I'm going to talk a little bit about um, its sort of like current context. And so May Day is also seen as a working class holiday. It is seen as, it's actually known as International Workers' Day, and it's celebrated all over the world. It's a global holiday. Um, its roots actually are in the US. Um, and it started as becoming more connected to labor and to workers in 1884, um, when a national federation of unions campaigned for an 8-hour day. And so in the 1880s, um, and the 1890s was a very tumultuous time in American history. It's actually the closest maybe that we saw our country come to at least a social revolution, if not like a political one. There's a lot of economic turmoil. We had labor organizing and doing strikes and nationwide strikes across the country. This is the time where we had the rise of the populists, which was like a small farmers movement that came out of like southern and western states, which had a lot of like more radical ideas, were very much influenced by socialists as well. Um, but in eight, so this National Federation of Unions began this campaign for the 8-hour workday, which is like something we take for granted now, right? We don't even really think about the roots of where the 8-hour workday comes from. But in May 1886, there was a crowd or a protest of striking workers, and police fired into that crowd. It was in Chicago. This is actually a picture from it. Um, and it led to a bigger protest at a place called Haymarket Square in Chicago. Actually, I'm wrong. This is actually the picture from Haymarket. And that was a couple days after the police had fired into this crowd of striking workers. Um, and at Haymarket, which was around May 1st, I think it was actually a couple days after May 1st. I don't think it was actually on May 1st. Someone threw a bomb, someone from the crowd, and it killed a police officer and some of the people who were in the crowd. And then the police responded by opening fire on the crowd, which actually killed cops and many people in the crowd. Um, 8 people who had organized the rally at Haymarket Square were actually arrested for inciting violence. And then they had this like fairly farcical trial, where 7 of the 8, or all 8 were convicted, and 7 of the 8 were actually executed. And so it's pretty significant. Those are probably names, um, which I'm not going to read through the names, which are like people who like are not who make the American history that you learn about when you grow up and like going through public education or anything else. The most known one was a guy named Albert Parsons. His wife actually was Lucy Parsons, who was a mixed race anarchist labor organizer, and was the Chicago police actually after her husband was executed, they called her the most dangerous person in America. And so that's how much they feared, this sort of militant labor movement that was going on. Um, May Day became a national holiday for workers, as a result of the Haymarket affair, and it's spread all over the world. And it's actually spread excuse me, it's celebrated as an official holiday in like many countries around the world, but not in the United States. In the United States, what we see is the ruling class actually about in the mid 1890s and 1896 started a holiday that we're celebrating in September called Labor Day. It's not really around workers, it's not really around unions. Now we see it as like a day where people take off and they have barbecues or there's Labor Day sales or things like that. It's really important to note that Labor Day was actually created to disempower workers and to disempower like more militant movements that were happening. And so and in many ways, you know, Labor Day is propaganda, which is like pro-boss propaganda. So I just want to like kind of like note that. Um, and so we have this sort of like militant tradition, or we have these militant labor movements which last up until the 1930s. And so there's, many strikes, many struggles. We have things like the Battle of Blair Mountain, which was like the second largest armed insurrection in American history, where um, coal miners that were trying to organize in southern West Virginia actually armed themselves, about 10,000 of them around the region in Appalachia, armed and marched on these mines. It led to the U.S. Army being called in. It led to the U.S. Army actually dropping bombs on the workers. The only time that's ever happened in American history. Um, and then, and then we also have like many other strikes, many other clashes. By the time the New Deal comes in, you know, the militant labor movement is so strong that the government decides to make a deal. And so they actually pass the Wagner Act, which actually gives workers they nationally legalize the right to collectively bargain. And it's actually a pretty important piece. And so all of the other gains that we see come out of the labor movement really sort of like originate around May Day. In many ways, it's these militant movements. Haymarket was actually Haymarket and May Day 1886 was a time in which we really see, um, these movements. And I just and so as we sort of like move into May Day 2026, it has kind of like taken on like a dual meaning, or it has multiple meanings. One is when we look at May Day, we need to actually think about the workers, the AFL-CIO, which is like the sort of large umbrella organization, which is over many unions, celebrates May Day. Um, and it's very much still like a workers' day in the US. And then it's also a day around immigrant rights, and it's a day where migrant workers don't go to work. In theory, um, people still need to make a living and still go. The other things I want to sort of throw out here is that we also have a long history of exploited labor as far as like slavery goes. And so like we see like black workers who were slaves and brought over here in chains actually contributed a lot to the building of the US. And then so that's actually just a kind of important thing to note. And then the other is that, women are also very much exploited in the labor force and, more so 100 and 150 years ago, but like still today, we see like really appalling statistics of like where women are like, paid much less than men and things like that. So I just want to like sort of like flag that stuff as we talk about May Day and things to think about. And then the last thing I want to talk about is a general strike. And so there's a lot of talk within like particularly the labor movement, but other sort of like radical and progressive movements around a general strike. The head of the United Auto Workers, Sean Fain, who's a pretty progressive guy compared to other labor leaders, has actually talked about a general strike on May Day 2028. And so some of what we're beginning to see is labor unions, community groups, communities like here in the Bay Area are all wanting to begin to normalize this idea of a general strike. After the murder of Renee Good, labor in Minneapolis called for a general strike for one day, which they did, and essentially shut down the state, but definitely shut down the city. The day after that general strike is when ICE murdered Alex Preddy, and then we saw youth and students lead another general strike. It was labor was less involved, but we're beginning to see things happen around general strikes where we want to start talking about, we want to normalize it. Um, my organization, 350 Bay Area, many other groups are part of a coalition called the Movement to End Fossil Fuels, where we're actually organized. I think you probably already talked about this before I came on. Is that right, Zoe? Mayday.
Yeah, a little bit, but
Okay.
please.
Okay. So on May Day, in at least 20 cities around the country, there'll be in fossil fuel contingents um, in joining like different May Day marches. And here in the Bay Area, we'll see in fossil fuel contingents in San Jose, San Francisco, and Oakland. And I don't have those links really prepared today, but hopefully those will get shared. And so, we're wanting to see like more and more cross movement work because one of the things that's really kind of kept us down for a long time has been being in these different silos. And so the more that we can support our labor brothers and sisters and our migrant brothers and sisters, it's going to be like a really important thing. And that was my brief background on May Day, but I can also answer questions too.
Thanks so much, Scott. I really appreciate it. Um, do folks have questions? I can either unmute or put in the chat.
Are there any ongoing projects or things that 250 Bay Area and labor movements are working on together?
Oh, it's a question for me. We're like in a bunch of different coalitions that are working on things with labor groups. So like the Unrig California is that bill is sponsored by like SEIU and California Educators Association. I forget what the actual thing is. Um, and a number of groups that we're really closely allied with have also been doing a lot of really important work around this. And we've kind of just been trying to connect the dots a little bit more and, really tie together, show the issues are already tied together, but show where those intersections lie. Um, so things like making companies pay their fair share, and things like the refinery transition, that's about worker safety. And that's really important for labor. Yeah, go ahead, Joseph.
Hey, so I am with a uh nonprofit that is involved in horticulture, and I was wondering if they could work with you guys because they've been developing trees that are better at absorbing and storing CO2. So I don't know if there's anything that they you could work with involving that, but if so, that would be really cool.
Thanks, Joseph. I'm gonna put my email in the chat if you want to reach out about that.
Okay, yeah, that'll be good.
Thanks. If nobody has any other questions, or if you have a question that comes to you later, feel free to email me in the chat and make sure what we can get to it. But really appreciate you coming on, Scott. Thank you so much. This is super informative, and I feel like that stuff is not things that like I did only heard about the Blair Mountain like insurrection, would you call it?
It's known as the March on Blair Mountain. It's known as the Battle of Blair Mountain.
The Battle of Blair Mountain. Okay. Yeah. I only learned about that like a year or two ago, and I was shocked that I had never heard of it.
There's a great film that came out in the late 80s called Matewan, which is a sort of like historical film, which actually talks. It's about the things that it's about the miners' strike in southern West Virginia that leads up to the Battle of Blair Mountain.
What's the movie called?
Matewan, I'll put it into the chat.
Thanks. Yeah. Well, oh,
which is the
great.
name of the town. It's the name of the town in West Virginia where it had started.
Got it. I'm personally writing that down so I can watch it. But definitely, y'all, there's a link to the Scott's podcast in the chat, as well as the May Day episode they did. Definitely recommend checking that out. And thank you, Scott, for joining and for all the work you do. Really appreciate it.
No
Yeah, thanks
problem.
for the round of
Great
applause.
talking to everybody.